On a freezing winter night in Portland, a former Navy SEAL named Jacob Miller was running his tiny street-side food stand, working through exhaustion the way he always did, refusing to let hardship harden his heart. So, when a small boy in a wheelchair appeared beneath the street lamp, soaked through and shaking in the rain, Jacob didn't hesitate. He pulled the boy inside, wrapped him in warmth, and gave him the first real meal he'd had all day. What Jacob didn't know was that a billionaire father was on his way, a man whose mistakes and secrets were about to crash into this quiet act of kindness. And nothing that followed would be simple. If this story moves you, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel to hear more powerful moments of hope and humanity. Winter rain on Pine Ridge Street. A hard winter rain swept across Portland, Oregon, turning the narrow sidewalks of Pine Ridge Street into streaks of silver beneath the street lamps. Jacob Miller tightened the collar of his navy winter coat as he wiped down the metal counter of his small street-side food stand. At 40 years old, he carried the broad shoulders and disciplined bearing of a former Navy SEAL. His face, angular and weathered, bore the quiet marks of a man who had seen too much and spoke too little. A neatly trimmed beard framed his jawline, and a few silver strands glinted at his temples. His dark brown eyes, steady and thoughtful, often softened when he looked at people in need, though they could turn sharp when danger stirred. For Jacob, the cold was familiar. He had marched through storms far worse, in deserts and on distant coasts. What unsettled him was not the wind, but the old ache running through his injured left knee. It tightened every time he worked long hours, yet he pushed on. Work kept his thoughts organized. Work kept his past at bay. Beside him lay Ranger, his 5-year-old German shepherd. Ranger's black and tan coat glistened faintly in the damp air, and his strong frame rested in a calm but alert posture. The harness across his chest read, "Service dog, do not pet," though children often tried anyway. Ranger's amber-brown eyes carried a deep intelligence, reflecting loyalty and a quiet sense of vigilance. He rarely barked without reason, and Jacob trusted that instinct more than he trusted most people. The evening had been slow. A few regulars passed by earlier, an elderly woman named Miss Claire with her floral scarf and warm laugh, and a college student who always apologized for having only $5. Jacob never corrected him. Some customers carried burdens heavier than their wallets. Now, close to closing time, Pine Ridge Street had fallen quiet. Only the steady hiss of the rain and the occasional whoosh of a passing bus kept the night from turning hollow. Jacob cleaned the grill in methodical strokes, his breaths forming faint clouds in the cold air. He was thinking about the bills due next week, about how long his stand could survive the winter, when Ranger's ears shot upward. The dog lifted his head, muscles tightening. His gaze shifted beyond the curtain of rain toward the left side of the street. Jacob glanced down. "What is it, boy?" Ranger emitted a single low sound, almost a bark, but softer. A warning wrapped in restraint. Jacob followed Ranger's line of sight. At first he saw nothing but the sheen of wet pavement. Then, when the wind pushed the rain sideways for a moment, a small shape emerged under the flickering light of a street lamp. A boy. A very small boy in a wheelchair. He sat motionless at the corner of the sidewalk, his thin jacket soaked through. The hood clung to his head, dark hair plastered against his forehead. His face, pale under the dim light, was scrunched in discomfort as he shivered violently. His hands clutched a frayed blanket that looked far too thin for a night like this. Jacob's breath caught, not from surprise, but from recognition. He knew the look of cold like that. He knew the look of someone trying to be brave while the world ignored them. Ranger took a step closer to the edge of the awning, then glanced back at Jacob as if urging him, asking him. But Jacob did not move yet. He remained behind the counter, frozen not by the rain, but by the strange pull rising in his chest. A tension that felt almost like hesitation, though he could not fully explain it. Why was a child alone at this hour? Where were the adults? Why did Ranger react before he did? The old instincts, those buried in the dust of training grounds and missions long past, whispered that something here was wrong, not just sad or unfortunate. Wrong. Jacob exhaled slowly, fighting the instinct to rush in without thinking. The last time he acted without thinking, a teammate had paid the price. His mind drifted back, uninvited, to the sand, to the heat, to a memory he tried every night to bury. It was one of the reasons he chose this quiet street corner. Serving food was simple, saving people was complicated. But Ranger's soft growl returned, grounding him. The dog stepped forward again, this time placing himself squarely at the edge of the stand, tail still, eyes fixed. It was the stance he used when sensing distress. Jacob pressed a hand to the counter, knuckles whitening. The rain hammered louder on the metal roof. Shadows rippled across the wet pavement. The boy's wheelchair wobbled slightly as the wind pushed it. Jacob felt the final thread of hesitation snap. But before he could take a step, Ranger barked, sharp, clear, and brief. Just one bark, enough to cut through the storm, enough to say, he's there, he needs help, enough to say, move. Jacob lifted his head fully, eyes narrowing toward the boy in the rain. Whether he had truly seen the child, or whether Ranger had seen for both of them first, he could no longer tell. But something in the air shifted. The night was no longer quiet, and nothing about this moment felt ordinary. The child in the rain and a warm meal, the wind rattled the metal panels of the food stand. As Jacob crossed the small distance between the counter and the edge of the awning, Ranger was already there, the dog's sturdy frame tense, amber eyes fixed on the shivering boy in the wheelchair. The rain slid down the metal roof in cold streams, dripping from the corners like threads of ice. "Hey, buddy," Jacob said softly as he stepped into the rain, his boots splashing on the wet pavement. "Let's get you out of this weather." The boy lifted his head. Up close, Jacob saw the child's pale skin and the purplish tint at the edges of his lips. Water clung to the strands of his dark brown hair, and his small shoulders trembled beneath a thin gray jacket that was soaked straight through. His hands, gripping the wheelchair's armrests, were stiff and cold. Jacob crouched slightly, his movements gentle. "Mind if I take you inside? You look freezing." The boy hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. His voice, when it came, was thin and hoarse. "My dad, he told me to wait. Just a few minutes." "How long's it been?" Jacob asked. The boy's breath hitched. "More than an hour." Jacob felt a tug in his chest, something between anger and worry. A memory flickered at the edge of his mind. A younger version of himself waiting for a father who rarely showed up. The sting of disappointment sharper than the cold. He pushed the thought aside. "Come on," Jacob murmured, gripping the handles of the wheelchair. "Let's warm you up." Ranger trotted beside them, his steps measured, ears slightly tucked back, a posture he used around frightened children. Jacob maneuvered the wheelchair under the shelter, then inside the food stand where the small heater hummed softly. He grabbed a clean towel and draped it over the boy's shoulders. "Name's Jacob," he said. "What's yours?" The boy wiped his face with shaky hands. "Ethan. Ethan Hale. Good to meet you, Ethan." Jacob's voice stayed calm, steady. "You like soup?" Ethan nodded, though uncertainty flickered across his features. I don't have money." Jacob paused for a moment, then smiled. "Lucky for you, the chef is feeling generous tonight." He moved to the little propane stove, pouring tomato broth into a pot and dropping in fresh herbs he kept for regulars. He sliced bread and buttered it, then placed it on the grill until it crisped to a warm golden brown. As the soup simmered, Ranger lay down beside Ethan's wheelchair. The dog rested his chin near the boy's feet, eyes softening. Ethan reached down instinctively, then froze when he saw the patch on Ranger's harness. Jacob noticed. "You can pet him a bit," he said quietly. "He's working, but he knows when someone needs comfort." Ethan touched Ranger's head, fingers brushing the warm fur. A small smile crept onto his lips, the first hint of ease Jacob had seen. Jacob returned with the bowl of steaming soup and the sandwich. "Careful, it's hot." He placed a napkin in Ethan's lap and pushed the small tray closer. Ethan took a sip. His eyes widened, glowing with something like relief. "This is really good." "Grandma's recipe," Jacob said. "She believed soup could fix anything except taxes." A tiny laugh escaped Ethan. Ranger's tail thumped once, as if pleased by the sound. Jacob watched the child eat, noting how he glanced at the door between bites. Fear lingered there, tucked behind every movement. Jacob leaned on the counter, choosing his words with care. "Ethan," he said gently, "you want to tell me where your dad went?" The boy stiffened. He's important. He has meetings and things. Sometimes he forgets stuff." He swallowed hard. "He doesn't like when I call. Says it distracts him." Jacob's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice neutral. "Parents get busy, but they shouldn't leave you in the rain." Ethan stared into the bowl, the spoon trembling slightly in his hand. "He gets mad when things don't go right, but when he's nice, he's really nice." His voice shrank. "He's just different on different days." Jacob felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He had met people like that, men whose tempers ran hotter than their compassion. Outside, the rain softened for a moment before the snow took over, flakes drifting past the window in thick white spirals. The glow from the street lamp turned the snowfall into a pale veil. Ethan looked up at the window. "It's pretty when it snows." "It is," Jacob said. "Harder to work in, though." "Then why do you do it?" Jacob blinked. Children had a way of asking questions that cut straight to the bone. "Because serving food is simple," he answered. "And simple is good. It keeps my mind steady." Ethan nodded as though he understood something deeper than Jacob intended. A gust of wind pressed against the door, rattling the metal frame. Ethan flinched. Ranger lifted his head and scanned the window, ears twitching. Jacob stepped over and peered out. The street was empty, only the snow and the dim glow of the lamppost. "Probably nothing," he murmured, though he wasn't certain. When he turned back, Ethan had stopped eating. His shoulders sank, his small frame curling inward as if bracing for something unseen. Jacob knelt beside him. "You're safe here, okay? No one's going to bother you." Ethan looked up, eyes wide and earnest. "Thank you, Jacob." Ranger pressed his nose gently against the boy's arm. But outside, beyond the swirling snow, a shadow moved briefly at the corner of the street, then vanished. Neither Jacob nor Ethan saw it, only Ranger did, and the dog's low, almost inaudible growl said enough. Something was coming. The billionaire father and the black Bentley. The snowfall thickened until Pine Ridge Street looked almost blurred, the lamps casting dim halos through the swirling white. Jacob stood near the doorway of his food stand, watching Ethan finish the last bite of his sandwich while Ranger lay beside him like a silent guardian. Then a pair of bright headlights cut across the street. A sleek black Bentley rolled to a stop at the curb, its glossy surface reflecting the drifting snow like ink marbled with silver. The engine purred in a low, confident hum, the kind that belonged to people who never questioned their place in the world. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a controlled elegance in the way he moved. His winter coat, sharply tailored in dark charcoal wool, hugged broad shoulders. Snowflakes clung to the thick fabric as he approached, and the cold light revealed a face carved with precision. High cheekbones, a firm jawline cleanly shaven, and lines of fatigue etched faintly around the mouth. His hair, black streaked with silver near the temples, was combed neatly back in a style that belonged to glossy magazines and corporate profiles. His eyes, steel gray and alert, held something heavy beneath the surface. Not cruelty, not arrogance, something closer to fear. Jacob recognized it instantly. The man reached the stand and paused at the doorway, scanning the scene as if he were entering a room filled with negotiations instead of a humble food stall. "Ethan," he said, voice low and tight. The boy's head snapped up. "Dad?" Jacob stepped aside as the man moved closer. This must be Alexander Hale, Ethan's father, 48 years old, founder of a tech empire, and a name that occasionally appeared on financial news broadcasts. Jacob had seen the man's photos before, but always framed in sleek offices or at charity galas, surrounded by people who smiled too wide. Seeing him in a snowstorm, standing stiff with concern, made him look strangely human. Alexander knelt beside the wheelchair, his coat sweeping across the wet floor. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking Ethan's sleeves, his hair, his cheeks with trembling hands. Ethan shook his head, though the motion was small and timid. I'm okay. Jacob helped me." The billionaire's jaw tightened. He turned toward Jacob. Before Jacob could speak, Ranger rose to his feet. The dog didn't bare his teeth, but he released a brief, low sound, almost a growl, almost a warning. His posture shifted subtly forward, protective. Alexander flinched. Jacob snapped his fingers gently. "Easy, Ranger." The German shepherd obeyed, but his eyes stayed locked on the stranger. Alexander straightened slowly, brushing snow from his coat. His voice returned to its controlled, corporate rhythm. "Thank you," he said to Jacob, for looking after him." The words were correct, but they were delivered with a stiffness that felt rehearsed, gratitude spoken by a man who rarely used the word. Jacob studied him with calm, steady eyes. He was freezing. I couldn't leave him outside. "I understand." Alexander's gaze flicked to Ethan, and something like shame tightened the corners of his eyes. "I was delayed." Jacob didn't respond. Ranger didn't blink. Alexander cleared his throat. "We should go. It's late." Ethan's shoulders tensed, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. His voice came small and uncertain. "Dad, I didn't mean to cause trouble. Alexander paused. For a moment, Jacob saw the man's expression track. Not anger, not impatience, but a kind of raw worry he seemed desperate to hide. He leaned down and adjusted Ethan's blanket with surprising gentleness. "You didn't," he murmured. "You didn't do anything wrong." But the softness vanished as soon as it appeared. He turned back to Jacob with a polite, finished sort of nod. "Really? Thank you." Then, with a brisk efficiency, he wheeled Ethan toward the Bentley. Jacob followed them with his eyes, but before Ethan reached the door, the boy twisted in his seat. Their eyes met, Ethan's full of gratitude but shadowed by something else. Something he didn't have the words for. Jacob lifted a hand in a small wave. Ethan mirrored the gesture. Ranger watched closely, the fur along his shoulders rising just a little, not in hostility, just awareness. Alexander helped Ethan into the car, closed the door, and circled around. The Bentley's lights flashed once, slicing through the snow. The car pulled away, leaving a plume of white mist behind. Jacob stood in the doorway long after the Bentley disappeared. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about the man's arrival didn't sit right. Not the expensive car, not the controlled words. It was the fear in his eyes. And the fact that Ranger, a dog who only reacted to real danger, had sensed tension the moment Alexander stepped foot on the sidewalk. Jacob glanced at Ranger. The dog's ears were still angled forward, gaze fixed on the street where the Bentley had vanished. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Jacob murmured. Ranger let out a soft, unsure whine. The snow kept falling, and though Ethan had left safely, the night felt anything but resolved. The truth behind the glass and a warning in the snow. The morning after the Bentley disappeared into the storm, Pine Ridge Street slept under a fresh layer of snow, the kind that muted sound, softened edges, and made the world look peaceful, even when it wasn't. Jacob arrived early to his food stand, his breath rising in pale clouds. Ranger trotted beside him, paws crunching through the frost. The dog was unusually alert, glancing down the street every few steps. Whatever he sensed the night before had not fully faded. Jacob unlocked the small metal shutters and began preparing for the day. Coffee pots warming, grill heating, bread laid out in neat stacks. Routine steadied him. It carved order into the unpredictable, but his mind kept circling back to Ethan's quiet smile and the shadow that had moved near the street lamp. By the time the clock neared 10, the snowfall lightened. The street awakened with scattered foot traffic. Miss Claire stopped by for her usual tea. A delivery driver grabbed a breakfast burrito. A young woman, tall, with wavy blonde hair tucked into a maroon beanie, ordered coffee before rushing off. Faces came and went, each leaving a brief imprint. Then the Bentley returned. It appeared from the far end of the street, gliding through the snow like a dark ship cutting across a white sea. It stopped not hurriedly, but deliberately. Jacob's shoulders tightened. Ranger stood immediately, tail stiff, ears pointed, body forming a protective line in front of Jacob. The rear door opened. Alexander Hale stepped out again. Today he wore a black wool coat, buttoned up to the neck, gloves of supple leather, and a scarf of muted gray. Snowflakes clung to his hair, which was combed back neatly as always, though a few strands fell loose, something Jacob had not seen the night before. His face showed more weariness than polish. The lines under his eyes were darker, the tightness around his mouth deeper. He looked like a man who had slept little, and he was alone. No Ethan. Alexander approached slowly, almost cautiously, as if aware that Ranger judged every step. When he reached the counter, he removed one glove and placed a thick envelope on the surface. "A token of gratitude," he said. Jacob didn't touch it. "I told you last night, I don't need payment for helping your kid." Alexander hesitated, his brow tightening. "This isn't a bribe. Then what is it?" "A recognition," Alexander said quietly, lowering his voice. "Of something I failed to do." Jacob kept his gaze steady. Ranger didn't blink. Alexander exhaled, a breath that clouded the cold air. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have left Ethan alone. I assumed the driver would be back sooner. I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought." His tone softened, trembling at the edges. "Ethan isn't easy to reach," Alexander continued. "Not since—" He stopped himself, eyes flicking away. "Since some things happened at home." Jacob didn't push. The man looked like he might fracture if prodded too sharply. "I haven't seen him smile in months," Alexander said, his expression cracking. "Last night, he did, because of you." Jacob's voice remained calm. "Kids smile when they're treated kindly. It doesn't take much. Alexander swallowed thickly, as if the simplicity of that truth hit harder than intended. For a heartbeat, he looked like he was fighting something. Guilt, maybe grief, buried under a mountain of pride. He slipped his glove back on. If you ever need anything at all, call me. He slid a business card across the counter. Jacob didn't take it, but he didn't push it back either. As Alexander turned to leave, Ranger let out a low, uncertain rumble. Not quite a growl, but enough to make the billionaire pause. Jacob followed the direction of Ranger's gaze. Across the street, near the entrance of a closed pawn shop, a man stood half-hidden under a narrow awning. Tall, narrow-shouldered, wearing a hooded jacket so oversized it swallowed his frame. His posture was rigid, too rigid. He wasn't browsing, he wasn't waiting, he was watching. Watching the Bentley, watching Alexander, and watching Ethan's father leave. The stranger's face was partly obscured by the hood, but Jacob caught a glimpse. Sharp jaw, thin lips, eyes scanning with restless calculation. The kind of man who blended in but didn't belong. Alexander didn't seem to notice. He reached the Bentley, opened the door, and paused only briefly to look back at Jacob. His expression carried something unspoken. Thanks, perhaps, or regret. Then he was gone. The Bentley pulled away. The man under the awning lingered a moment longer. Then he, too, slipped into the mouth of an alley and vanished. Ranger barked once, a soft, uneasy sound. Jacob stared after the stranger, unease settling heavy in his chest. That night, the snow thickened again, falling in sheets against the window of Jacob's stand as he packed up. Street traffic had died down. Pine Ridge Street was nearly empty. Then he heard wheels, the soft, uneven rhythm of a wheelchair rolling across snow. Jacob turned. Ethan. The boy was alone, coated in snowflakes, lips pale, hands trembling against the armrests. Jacob rushed forward. "Ethan, what happened?" The boy's eyes were wide with terror. His voice cracked. "Uncle Jacob! I think someone's trying to take me." Rescue in winter and a father's promise. The snowstorm had thickened to a white curtain by the time Jacob locked the food stand and pulled Ethan's wheelchair under the shelter of the awning. Ranger pressed close to the boy, his warm breath rising in soft puffs. The dog's body was tense, muscles coiled like springs beneath his black and tan coat. Jacob crouched to Ethan's level. "Who tried to take you?" Ethan shook his head, trembling too violently to speak at first. His dark brown hair stuck to his forehead, wet from melting snow. I was going home," he finally whispered. "Dad sent the driver, but someone else got there first." Jacob's pulse sharpened. He didn't waste another second. He pulled out his phone and called Alexander. The line picked up on the second ring. Alexander's voice, normally controlled and resonant, sounded frayed. "Jacob?" "It's Ethan," Jacob said. "He's with me, safe, but someone tried to grab him." There was a long, electric silence, one born from fear, rage, and the terrifying love of a parent. "I'm coming," Alexander said. "Send me your location." Minutes later, the Bentley tore through the blizzard and screeched to a stop. Alexander stepped out before the engine even settled. Snow clung to his expensive black coat. His gray eyes locked on Ethan, and the towering facade of a billionaire fell away, replaced by the raw panic of a father. "Ethan," he breathed, kneeling. "Are you hurt?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm okay, Dad." Ranger moved aside but kept a vigilant stance. When Alexander rose, the fear in his eyes hardened into something else. Resolve. Jacob met that look. Two men from opposite worlds, suddenly aligned by the same instinct. "Show me where," Alexander said. Ethan pointed weakly toward the industrial district. They were near the river, the old warehouses. Jacob nodded. He knew the area well, too well. It was the kind of forgotten edge of the city where no one asked questions. Ranger barked, sharp and urgent, then took off at a run, nose low, tail straight, following a scent trail carved into the snow. "Let's go," Jacob said, tightening his coat. Alexander pushed Ethan's wheelchair into the Bentley and secured him inside. "Stay here. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone except Jacob or me." Ethan nodded, eyes wide. Then the two men followed the dog into the storm. The industrial outskirts of Portland were a maze of old brick warehouses, half-collapsed roofs, rusted loading docks, and flickering yellow lights. Ranger led them to one such building, long abandoned, its windows broken, its metal siding dented and rust-stained. Jacob pressed a hand to Ranger's back, feeling the dog's controlled tremble, excitement mixed with vigilance. Inside, muffled voices echoed. 3 men, by the sound of it. Jacob motioned for Alexander to stay low behind a stack of old pallets. Though Alexander was no soldier, there was a steadiness in the way he crouched. The polished billionaire veneer gave way to something grittier beneath. Through a crack in the wall, Jacob got a glimpse of the kidnappers. One was the hooded watcher from earlier, thin, sharp-jawed, with restless eyes. Beside him stood a heavy-set man with a shaved head and a thick beard. His leather jacket strained over his broad stomach. The third was younger, nervous, pacing near a battered laptop. They spoke in low, urgent tones. "Boss wants the kid by morning," the bearded man said. "Once the deal goes public, Hale will pay anything." Alexander's jaw clenched. Jacob's voice dropped to a whisper. "They know your deal. Someone inside your company tipped them off." Alexander didn't deny it. Jacob scanned the room, mind shifting into the focus honed by years of SEAL training. The walls, exits, angles, the kidnapper's positioning, Ranger's readiness. "Stay here," Jacob murmured. He slipped around the side entrance, silent as the falling snow. Ranger followed close, years of training evident in every controlled movement. Inside, Jacob created a distraction, knocking over a pile of rusted pipes. The crash echoed through the warehouse. The pacing kidnapper spun around. "What was that?" Before they could form a plan, Jacob moved. He grabbed the nervous one first, pulling him into a chokehold and lowering him quietly to the ground. The bearded man charged, swinging a long wrench. Jacob ducked and drove an elbow into the man's ribs. The impact sent him sprawling into a stack of crates. The hooded watcher pulled a knife. Ranger roared forward. The German shepherd slammed into the man, jaws locking onto the thick fabric of his sleeve, dragging him down with powerful precision. The man fought, but Ranger didn't yield. He pinned him, muscles rigid, growl low and dominating. Jacob disarmed the kidnapper in seconds. The warehouse fell silent except for heavy breathing. Outside, sirens approached. Alexander had secretly called the police as they entered. The officers stormed in just as Jacob stepped away from the subdued men. Handcuffs clicked. The kidnappers were dragged out into the cold. Alexander stood near the entrance, eyes shining with relief. When he saw Ethan, safe, bundled in the Bentley, he exhaled a shuddering breath. His composure cracked when Ethan threw his arms around Jacob's neck. "Thank you," the boy whispered. Even Ranger pressed close, leaning his warm weight against the child's leg. Alexander stepped forward, voice thick. "I owe you both my son's life." Jacob shook his head, just glad he's safe. But Alexander wasn't done. A few days later, the snowstorm cleared. Alexander returned to Pine Ridge Street, not with a thick envelope, but with a blueprint. A new food shop, brick and glass storefront, commercial kitchen, heating system, seating, storage. All covered, Alexander said. Not as repayment, as respect. Jacob almost refused. Then Alexander added, "We'll fund a weekly free dinner for homeless families, for kids like Ethan used to be." Jacob's resistance softened. Ranger wagged his tail. Ethan smiled for the first time freely. And Alexander's expression, usually carved from stone, warmed as he said, "I owe you and my son more than money." Under the winter lights, the three of them stood together, a soldier, a father, a child, and Ranger, steadfast as always. The kind of family born from danger, snow, and second chances. Sometimes the quiet corners of life are where the greatest miracles choose to appear. A tired veteran offering shelter, a frightened child searching for safety, a father rediscovering what it means to love, and a loyal dog standing guard over them all. No thunder, no lightning, just ordinary people meeting in an unexpected moment, forming a bond strong enough to change their lives. Some would say it was luck, but others, including Jacob himself, would say it was God's way of reminding us that kindness is never wasted, and that His protection often arrives in the form of people we do not expect. In our everyday routines, it is easy to overlook these small signs. A hand reaching out, a door held open, a meal shared, a child's quiet smile. Yet it is in these simple acts that grace settles gently into our lives. So, as this story ends, let it be a gentle reminder that no matter how cold the world may feel, there is always warmth waiting to rise. Through courage, compassion, and the quiet guidance of the one who watches over us all. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a bit of hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join us in spreading stories that lift the spirit. And may God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and the strength to face each new day with kindness. May His light guide your steps, just as it guided theirs.